Hi, my name's Tessa Nelson, and I'm going to be going over the action plan that I created to create the position for victim advocacy in our county. So, for the last 9 to 10 years, we have not had a victim advocate in Franklin County. To meet the growing needs of the community, a domestic violence caseworker has been assigned from Utah. This caseworker is limited in their role due to funding for her position being supplied by the state of Utah through their shelter. Idaho does not provide statewide funding for victim services at the time. So I conducted 3 stakeholder interviews. I interviewed the parole officer, Boone Smith, the caseworker over our area, Jane Doe, and Cecily Costley, who was the previous victim advocate. Boone noticed that the issues that he saw within the position was that there was a lack of funding. The county cannot provide funding for victim advocacy, and he even has some funding problems with funding through his office and getting funding for things. Lack of interest in the position because he believes that victim advocacy needs to happen on scene of crime, and that leads to irregular hours. People would not be interested. And immigration status. People who are illegal immigrants are scared to go to police and do reporting processes because of the cycle of abuse that can exist there, and due to being afraid of being deported by the courts or by police. The caseworker over Franklin County noticed that community trust is a big issue because of systematic power imbalances. So the judges, that she said the judges are likely to give leniency to families that they know or families that are well respected in the community and are related to those families and such. And that just makes victims feel like they can't approach and get justice through services, and so they just get stuck in the positions that they are in. And she also noticed that a lot of them tend to think of family violence needs to be dealt with in the family, and most of these people are more likely to go through religious clergy to get assistance, and that it kind of creates a love bombing situation where the perpetrator will go through a forgiveness process and then it ends up being love bombing and doing the cycle over and over again instead of it just being halted. And clergy here are not required to mandate report for vulnerable adults or children, and so that ends up being a little bit of a problem. Cecily Costley noticed different issues with the area and her previous position in it. So she was hired to the prosecutor's office, and they expected her to try and get people to do reporting, speak with police, and work with the court, even if it wasn't in the best interest of her victim at the time. And so it created conflicts of interest with the prosecutor's office having expectations of her, but it potentially violating the rights of her client. And all of them said that education in the community was a huge one. We do not have a lot of crime here, but there is crime that does exist, and it's usually interpersonal and interfamily. So it can be very hush hush, and just our community is not aware of it. So some similar programs that I looked into was through Cache County, Utah. They have their own victim advocacy department. They serve anyone who's been a victim of a violent crime. They have 3 full-time advocates and 1 part-time. They serve Spanish-speaking individuals. They ensure that the courts treat victims with dignity and respect and follows their rights, which is not something it sounds like our court is doing a very good job with right now. And they attend court with the victim while helping them through the process. Pocatello, Idaho is the city closest to us, and they're over an hour away. So our resources, of course, are really limited with people being that far. But theirs is provided through the city's prosecutor's office, and they work directly with the victim while supporting their rights. They help victims with their cases, walk them through rape reporting processes and court testimony as well, and they provide emotional support and connects victims to other resources in the area. So I noticed that they all use the feminist perspective. And so, because Cache County has a lack of tolerance for domestic violence, they ensure the victim's right to be heard in court, and they do protection from abusers, and they help them with restraining protective orders and no contact orders. And they have mandatory reporting laws as well for workplace professionals regarding minors and vulnerable adults. And so that's how that they kind of undermine the patriarchal systems that come into play when we're looking at victimhood and victim violence. So for setting up victim advocacy, I looked at 3 different modes. Rothman's mode, which is identify the problem, move forwards with policy planning and social planning, and then moving on to social action and change. The feminist perspective is something I also kept in consideration because although we know that random acts of violence do occur, most of our violence in our community is actually interpersonal and happen from a male to female ratio with intimate partner violence and violence with children. And so, an emphasis on patriarchal systems that exist in the community that may play a role in that kind of violence. I also use Miles Horton and his popular education method just because it's a great way when we're confronting community education for people and the participants in the community to consider how status quo and their roles play into policy creation and how it affects individuals in that. So I am with identifying the community problems, I have limited it down to funding, education, community trust, conflicts of interest, and systematic power imbalances. And so when it comes to educating the community, I've decided that the best place for that to occur was Priestley Mental Health, because they can target community attitudes on victimization through a trauma-informed lens. They are also the only mental health agency in our county. And so they have the trust of the community. Those who serve as clergy in the area will be particularly invited to attend so they can understand more about love bombing tactics and how those work. But the meetings will go over statistics on family violence through the probation office, the power and control wheel, and will specifically have an emphasis on abusive threats against illegal immigrants and what those look like. And that's what this picture is demonstrating. Where and how power dynamics exist and what can be done to challenge them on a family level and also just on a community level as well. When it comes to educating the community, these meetings will also go over specific questions that attack patriarchal systems by asking these questions. Do you feel that you have a certain level of ownership over your intimate partner and their actions? What does autonomy mean to you? And do you feel like you need to control your children because of their choices reflecting on your character? Just to kind of see demonstrate what that ownership concept looks like. So I also want to continue holding ongoing education through Preston, Idaho, ongoing education. And I would do this through Priestley Mental Health as well. So these education sessions would go more into what systematic powers have been seen that exist maybe through our court systems and local government to bring the issues to light and shed a critical lens on any abuses of power in those departments, and what kind of advocacy looks like and what could happen and what powers the citizens have to overcome those. I also would want to hold a private education session for county commissioners, judges, hospital, mental health workers, and city officials to reflect on what power and control looks like so we can target the issues that Jane Doe identified, that caseworker, and then overcome them without conflict, ideally, but if conflict needs to happen, it can still happen through the community rising up against these kinds of power systems that are at play. So the last step in Rothman's mode is just creating the position and change in the community. The problem with county, which leads back to county funding, although Idaho does not provide statewide funding, the Idaho Council on Domestic Violence and Victim Assistance does supply a federal grant. And upon approval, the victim advocate would be hired either through the creation of an independent office in Franklin County or Priestley Mental Health. Unlike Pocatello, this position will not be offered through the prosecutor's office because of the previous issues with conflicts of interest between the advocate victim and the goals of the prosecutor. This position will be filled by a Spanish English-speaking individual who holds an undergraduate degree in human services, and they would have previous training and work experience in trauma-informed care. And they would have an understanding on how to help the victim advocate for themselves with immigration law. And I believe that's very important to help immigrants feel like they can get services in the area and advocate for themselves. All right, so in conclusion, just based on the theories that I used through Miles Horton, the concepts of popular education, and Jack Rothman and his modes of change in communities, with an emphasis on the feminist perspective and just challenging those patriarchal systems and those systems of oppression that we have in our community, the projected outcome of this proposal is an effective advocacy position that can serve everyone in the community and just undermines systematic oppression in all forms. Thank you so much for watching my presentation. I appreciate it.